Hi, I'm prominent space vampire Count Vargelon, and I'm here to address an interesting theory about the A Song of Ice and Fire book, A Storm of Swords. That theory? Cersei killed Joffrey. Preston Jacobs mentioned this theory in passing in one of his videos, and it seemed so crazy to me that I went to look for the evidence myself. This video is the result. Let's start with the sequence of events. During his wedding feast, Joffrey chokes to death. Cersei immediately announces that it was poison and Tyrion was responsible. So first off, was Joffrey poisoned at all? Could he have just choked on pigeon pie? In all likelihood, no. Joffrey complains about having trouble swallowing, then tries to drink some wine to help, and moments later he's unable to breathe. These aren't the actions of someone who has a piece of food caught in their windpipe, which would be immediate coughing and struggling to breathe, but rather the actions of someone whose airways were gradually tightening until they completely choked off. So it's safe to say that he was killed by the Strangler, a poison known to cause this exact effect. So there certainly was a crime. Joffrey was murdered. But who could have done it? Let's look at the three main suspects and consider their means, motive, and opportunity. Suspect 1. Tyrion Lannister. Means. We're told that the Strangler is one of the rarest poisons in the world. According to Maester Pycelle, there was a dose in his chest of poisons and potions when they were stolen by Tyrion, and now that dose is missing after Joffrey's death. So Tyrion could have had it. Notably, though, it wasn't reported missing before Joffrey died. Motive. Tyrion really hated Joffrey, and they lay out all of his motives for wanting the king dead at the trial, so I'm not going to go over it here, but yes, he's a great suspect. Opportunity. This is where we get into trouble. At first it seems like Tyrion had plenty of opportunity, since he was acting as Joffrey's cupbearer. But vitally, he had no idea that he would be taking on that role. It was a whim of Joffrey's during the feast. Going into the meal, he would have no expectation that he would have an opportunity to poison Joffrey's food or drink. So he would have had to have already been carrying the poison on him. Yes, in A Dance with Dragons he spends the entire book carrying some poison around until he finally puts it in someone's food. But crucially, that's a poison that will take some time to work. The Strangler kills near instantaneously. It's not the kind of poison that you can get away with using unless it does its job perfectly and people think the victim is choking on some food. Here's how it's described in A Clash of Kings. Dissolved in wine, it would make the muscles of a man's throat clench tighter than any fist, shutting off his windpipe. They said a victim's face turned as purple as the little crystal seed from which his death was grown. But so too did a man choking on a morsel of food. Note the contradiction in there. Crescent describes its effect after being dissolved in wine. That's not actually the best way to use it, since it's impossible to get wine stuck in your throat. Yes, people generally grab a bite of food and then a sip of wine, but they also sip wine with empty mouths. So if one was to put the Strangler in wine, you'd have a 50-50 chance of it looking like they were obviously poisoned. But put it in food, and you'd be almost guaranteed that it looks like someone choked to death on their meal. Keep that in mind, it's going to be important later. So, to recap, Tyrion had means and motive, but no real opportunity, since he would have had to have been carrying around poison for no good reason, as well as being idiot enough to put an obvious poison into the wine he personally was serving Joffrey. Let's move on to Suspect 2, Littlefinger and the Tyrells. This is a good theory. On the TV adaptation Game of Thrones, they're the ones who are responsible. Is it the same in the books? Let's look at the elements of the crime. Means. As mentioned above, the Strangler is one of the rarest poisons in the world. We're given no reason to suspect that either Littlefinger or the Tyrells had access to it. Opportunity. Sansa's theory of the crime is that Ser Dantos gave her a hairnet with a crystallized form of the Strangler in it, disguised as an amethyst, and that Olenna Tyrell took it from the hairnet during the feast, then dropped it in Joffrey's wine. This is a ludicrous plan on every level. First off, there's no reason to suspect Olenna Tyrell is the kind of sleight-of-hand master it would take to get the poison into the wine without anyone noticing. Remember, if anyone saw her do any of it, the plan falls apart. Secondly, why hide the poison in a hairnet? People weren't being searched for small gems on the way into the feast. Moreover, how could Olenna be counted on to figure out which gem was the secret poison stone? A silver hairnet with an amethyst on every junction would have dozens of stones on it. Would she really be able to grab the right one at the right moment? More importantly, what was her plan to get away with it? She had no way of knowing that Tyrion would be made cupbearer. If he hadn't, and she was the poisoner, then everyone would have seen Joffrey choke to death on wine, assumed it was poison, and gone looking for a suspect, risking her exposure. Motive. Only one of them has one. The Tyrells want an alliance with the Lannisters. Littlefinger wants everything to fall apart so he can swoop in and take over. Killing Joffrey only serves one of their goals, and not very well at that. Yes, the Tyrells are able to marry Margaery to Tommen, but that's only because they lucked into a convenient scapegoat in Tyrion. If Joffrey had simply been obviously poisoned at the feast, as was the supposed plan, the search for a culprit would have turned the great western houses against one another. That's the opposite of the Tyrells' goals. Yes, it's what Littlefinger wanted, but it wasn't his plan. How do we know this? Because Littlefinger explains what his plan was. Spread word around Highgarden that Joffrey was a cruel beast, then get Loras added to the Kingsguard. Wait for Joffrey to do something horrible to Margaery, which he almost certainly would, and then trust that Loras would either kill Joffrey or die trying. Littlefinger's plan is based on certainties and well-known behavioral traits. Joffrey is cruel, so he'll treat Margaery horribly. Loras is extremely protective of his sister, and prone to violent rages. When Renly was killed, he was so angry that he slew 2 members of his own Rainbow Guard. Of course he would go after Joffrey. This would result in everything that Littlefinger wanted. A dead king or queen causing political instability, and the Tyrell-Lannister alliance shattered by either kingslaying or an attempt at it. Of course, there's one other thing that Littlefinger wanted. Sansa. And it works out perfectly that he was able to spirit her away during the fracas at the wedding. So perfectly, in fact, that Littlefinger must have known about the poisoning before it happened, right? Which means he had to be in on it. Except that isn't what it means at all. Littlefinger knew something was going to happen at the wedding, and he expertly planned for it. But we'll get there when we address the real killers of Joffrey. For now, it's enough to say that there's no element of the crime that points to Littlefinger and the Tyrells killing Joffrey. Suspect 3. Pycelle and Cersei. This seems absurd until you figure out what was actually going on at the wedding feast. Joffrey was not the target. Tyrion was. I'll run through the elements of the crime quickly and then get to the specifics. Means. As has been previously established, Pycelle had a dose of the Strangler available in his box of potions, and it was gone after Joffrey's death. It's a rare poison, this might be the only dose in King's Landing, so it stands to reason it was the murder weapon. Once Pycelle was released from prison, all of his effects were returned to him, so it's actually more likely that he had access to the poison than Tyrion. Motive. Pycelle wanted revenge on Tyrion for his imprisonment, and Cersei has wanted to kill Tyrion for his entire life. Opportunity. Cersei was in charge of the feast. She could have had her people put anything in Tyrion's food. Were the Strangler on a piece of pie, for example, and had Tyrion eaten it and choked to death, it would have looked like an accident, and since no one in King's Landing likes Tyrion, there would have been no further investigation. So now we have means, motive, and opportunity, but it only makes sense if Tyrion's pie was poisoned, not the wine. So is there any proof of that? Well, Joffrey flat out says that's what happened as he's dying, but let's go to the text to be sure. First, here's a description of the speed at which the Strangler works, from A Clash of Kings. The wine was sour on his tongue. He let the empty cup drop from his fingers and shatter on the floor. Melisandre says something. Crescent tried to reply, but his words caught in his throat. His cough became a terrible thin whistle as he strained to suck in air. Look at that. He drank a sip of it, and immediately felt the effects. Seconds later, his throat was so tight he couldn't even speak. That's fast. Now let's look at Joffrey's death. It's ill luck not to eat the pie, he scolded as he filled his mouth with hot spiced pigeon. See, it's good. Spitting out flakes of dry crust, he coughed and helped himself to another fistful. As you can see, he starts feeling the effects of the Strangler, trouble swallowing, immediately after scooping up and eating Tyrion's untouched pie. He mistakenly thinks that the pie is simply dry and tries to drink some wine to wash it down, but he's already choking, which he blames on the pie. So how do we know that the pie, and not the wine, is poisoned? Simple. Take another look at Crescent's death, where we learn why the Strangler is a particularly bad poison to put in wine. The wine was sour on his tongue. The Strangler makes wine taste sour, and if you tasted sour wine, you might spit it out and not drink any of it, rendering the poison useless. The pie, on the other hand, well, I'll let the text explain. A serving man placed a slice of hot pigeon pie in front of Tyrion and covered it with a spoon of lemon cream. This isn't a buffet. Tyrion was served a piece of pie that was meant specifically for him, and that pie was covered in lemon cream, so when he bit into it and tasted something sour, he wouldn't think twice about swallowing it. This poisoning was planned out so completely that it even affected the menu. There's only one thing that the conspirators couldn't have planned on: that Joffrey would grab the pie and eat it before Tyrion had a chance to. The whole thing would have taken just a second. Cersei and Pycelle didn't have time to object, and would likely have been shocked silent in horror at the result of their actions. Of course, the text only offers clear signs that it was Tyrion's pie that was poisoned, not the wine. How can we be sure Cersei and Pycelle were responsible? There are 3 things pointing in this direction. 1. Littlefinger knew something was going to happen at the wedding. Cersei's plot would have required a lot of advanced planning and more than a couple of people. And Cersei loves to brag about her schemes. There's every reason to think that she would have dropped a hint that something bad was going to happen to Tyrion at the wedding, most likely to one of the Kettleblacks. The Kettleblacks all work for Littlefinger and would have told him about it. This would fit his plans perfectly. Have Dantos spirit Sansa away the moment Tyrion starts choking, and then she can be on a boat before anyone notices she's missing. Then, when Tyrion is dead, even if people figure out it was poison, they'll just assume Sansa did it. 2. 100 people watch Joffrey choke on a piece of pie, and only one of them loudly and immediately announces that it was poison. Cersei. She also immediately points the finger at Tyrion. Maybe she's hysterical and simply blames Tyrion for everything, but a far more likely reason for her actions is that she knows exactly what happened. And as the person responsible for the poisoning, she knows that an investigation will never turn up a third party's involvement. She can blame it on Tyrion, and no one will argue with her, which is exactly what happens. 3. The smoking gun. This one is easy to miss, but it's also the most important line in the entire plot. Pycelle confesses to poisoning the pie. Not in words, but in actions. Here's the scene. A few yards away, King Joffrey is, to all appearances, choking on a piece of food. Everyone is trying to help in all of the correct ways. Water, hitting him on the back, inducing vomiting. While all of this is going on, what does Grand Maester Pycelle, the foremost medical authority on the scene, suggest as a course of action? Grand Maester Pycelle shouted for someone to help him back to his chambers to fetch his potions. The boy is choking! What good could the box of potions possibly do? There is no potion for piece of bird caught in windpipe. Unless, of course, Pycelle knows what has happened and that Joffrey is dying of the poison that was meant for Tyrion. A poison that has an antidote, which we know full well that it does, since Melisandre survived drinking far more than the amount which killed Maester Crescent. Before Joffrey's even dead, before anyone even has time to think, Pycelle already knows exactly which poison is killing the king. There's only one way he could possibly have that information. Looking at all the evidence, there's only one possible culprit for Joffrey's death at the Purple Wedding. He was killed by his mother and Pycelle. That's the theory anyhow. I've been Prominent Space Vampire Count Vargelon. See you back here for the next thing.